The letter had been sitting on Maya Caldwell's kitchen counter for 4 days, and she had learned to walk past it the way you learn to walk past a bruise carefully, without looking directly at it. It was from Hartwell Property Management, and the subject line, visible even through the envelope's thin paper, read, "Notice of Ownership Transfer and Lease Review." She knew what that meant. The building on North Damon had been sold, which meant her below-market lease, the one her landlord Gerald had grandfathered in, as a favor to her father's memory, was as good as gone. She poured her coffee, pulled on her blazer, and left for work without opening it. The meeting notice came at 9:15, forwarded from the building management company to all tenants in the commercial and residential units. Mandatory tenant briefing, 11 a.m. Second floor conference room. Maya stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to her own phone, and went back to drafting a press release for a client who sold artisanal hot sauce and wanted coverage in the Tribune. She arrived at the conference room at 11:03. Most of her neighbors were already seated, the florist from the ground floor, the couple who ran the framing shop, 2 other residents from the upper floors. They all had the same expression, the kind that lives somewhere between resignation and controlled panic. Maya took a seat near the back. He came in at 11:05. She knew who he was the way you know things in Chicago if you read the business section at all. Ethan Voss, 34, founder and CEO of Voss Capital, a private equity firm that had spent the last 2 years acquiring undervalued commercial real estate on the north side and, according to the Tribune's last profile of him, had no particular interest in being liked. The photo in that profile had made him look remote and faintly impatient, like a man who had agreed to the interview under duress. In person, standing at the front of a conference room in a building he now owned, he looked exactly the same. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that did not try too hard. His face was the kind that gave nothing away unless it chose to. He did not introduce himself. He set a folder on the table and said, "I'll keep this short. All commercial leases are being renegotiated at current market rates. Residential leases, under 24 months remaining, will be offered a buyout. Residential leases over 24 months are staying as is." He glanced around the room. "Question." The florist raised her hand immediately. "My lease is up in 8 months. What's the buyout?" "Your property manager will have the numbers by Friday." A small eruption of voices followed. Maya sat very still and said nothing. She was doing the math. Her lease had 27 months remaining. By his own terms, she was in the as-is category. Her rent would not change. She waited for the relief to hit. It did not hit. Instead, something else crept in, a low, uncomfortable feeling she could not quite name. After the room began to empty, she stayed in her seat. The florist was arguing in low, urgent tones with the property manager who had accompanied Voss. The framing shop couple had left looking shaken. Maya watched Ethan Voss gather his folder and turn toward the door, and then she heard herself speak. "Excuse me." He turned, up close. His eyes were darker than the photo suggested, and the expression in them was one of mild, impersonal attention, the look of a man who was prepared to answer one question and then leave. "My lease," Maya said. "The 27 months. I don't remember telling anyone here how long I had left. The building management office would have that, but they're based in Naperville, and I've never spoken to anyone at Voss Capital." She paused. "So how did you know I was in the as-is category before you walked in?" Something moved across his face, very briefly. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. "All tenant files were transferred when the sale closed," he said. "We reviewed them. All of them. All of them." She studied him for a moment. "And you just happened to have mine memorized." He looked at her the way you look at someone who has asked a question you already know the shape of and are not yet willing to answer. "Is there something about your lease terms you'd like to dispute, Miss Caldwell?" The fact that he knew her name, which she had not given, which was not on any nameplate outside her unit, settled into her chest like a drop of cold water. "No," she said. "Then we're done." He moved toward the door. "I grew up in Pilsen," she said, to his back. He stopped. She watched the pause, just a half-second too long for someone who had no reason to care where she grew up. Then he walked out. Maya sat in the emptied conference room for another minute, her coffee going cold in her hand, listening to the specific silence of a room where something had almost been said. By the time she got back upstairs, she had made a decision. She opened the letter from Hartwell on her counter, found the contact information for the new management company, and sent an email formally requesting termination of her lease citing change of building ownership as per the opt-out clause in her original agreement. She did not stop to examine why she was doing it. She already knew, and the knowing made her stomach tight. It was not the rent, which was fair. It was not the meeting, which had been efficient to the point of coldness. It was the fact that Ethan Voss had walked into that room already knowing things about her that she had not offered, and had not seemed to think that required explanation. She was not interested in finding out what else he knew. Her phone buzzed 20 minutes later. An email from the new management office, response time that no property management company in Chicago had ever achieved in the history of Maya's tenancy, acknowledging her request and asking her to call to discuss. She stared at it. A response in 20 minutes, as though someone had been watching for it. She did not call. She forwarded the email to her personal folder, closed her laptop, and went back to the hot sauce press release. But for the rest of the afternoon, she kept thinking about the way he had stopped when she said Pilsen, and the way he had not turned around. The Lakeshore Gala was not the kind of event Maya attended voluntarily. It was the kind of event she attended because her company, Brightfield PR, had just landed a small sponsorship slot for one of the non-profit partners, which meant Maya, as the senior account lead, was expected to appear, smile at the right people, and collect 2 or 3 business cards that would turn into nothing. She was standing near the bar at the Intercontinental, holding a glass of sparkling water and pretending to check her phone, when her colleague Priya grabbed her elbow. "Okay, so," Priya said, in the voice she used when delivering information that was going to ruin someone's evening. "You know the Donnelly and Park pitch? The one we've been building for 6 weeks?" Maya looked at her. "The one we're presenting Thursday." "Yeah. So, apparently, Meridian Communications landed the contract yesterday. Like, signed and everything." The glass in Maya's hand felt suddenly heavier. Donnelly and Park was a mid-size architectural firm with a renovation project in River North that had Brightfield's name on it in Maya's head as clearly as if she'd already invoiced it. 6 weeks of strategy documents, competitor analysis, a full campaign framework. Gone. "How?" she said. It was not really a question. "I don't know yet." Someone inside must have Priya stopped, looked past Maya's shoulder, and made a face that Maya had learned to interpret as "brace yourself. Don't turn around yet." But Ethan Voss just walked in, and he's coming this way. And I just remembered that Voss Capital is a primary investor in Meridian Communications. Maya turned around. He was crossing the room with the same unhurried certainty she remembered from the conference room, the walk of someone who expected the space to accommodate him, and was generally correct about that. He was with 2 other men, deep in conversation, and for a moment it seemed like he might pass without noticing her. Then he looked up, and the moment when his eyes found her was clean and immediate, like he had known exactly where she was standing. She moved toward him before she had decided to, because the alternative was standing by the bar, feeling like something was happening to her that she had no part in, and that she could not tolerate. "Mr. Voss," she said. He stopped. The 2 men with him took a half step back, with the practiced discretion of people who worked for someone who had these moments regularly. "Miss Caldwell." His voice was even, not surprised. "Meridian Communications," she said. "Voss Capital owns what? A 30% stake?" 32, he said. "And Donnelly and Park just signed with them." "I believe that's correct." She held his gaze. The noise of the gala continued around them, glasses and music, and 40 conversations happening at once, and she had the strange sensation that they were standing in a quieter room inside the room. "I've been building that pitch for 6 weeks, she said. "Brightfield had a real shot at that contract. And now we don't, because you pointed your portfolio company at our client." He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was not cold, exactly, but was not warm either. It was the expression of a man, considering how much of the truth to give a person who was asking the wrong question. "I did not tell Meridian to pursue Donnelly and Park," he said. "But you knew they were going to." Silence. "You are looking at the wrong problem, Miss Caldwell." "Then tell me the right one. I don't think this is the right place for that conversation." "I think you decide a lot of things on my behalf without asking me," she said, and her voice was level and precise, because she had learned a long time ago that the moment you let anger make you loud, you lose. "My lease. My contract. What's next?" Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not quite, but something adjacent to it. something that acknowledged she had gotten closer to the thing underneath than he had expected. "Enjoy your evening," he said, and stepped past her. She stood where she was, breathing carefully, watching him move through the crowd. Priya appeared at her elbow. "What was that?" "I have no idea," Maya said, which was not entirely true. She turned and walked toward the French doors that opened onto the terrace, needing 2 minutes in cold November air. She got both, and also, unexpectedly, a man she had not seen approach. "Miss Caldwell," he said. He was around her age, well dressed in a way that was slightly too deliberate about it. Pocket square, French cuffs, the kind of grooming that signals effort rather than ease. He had Ethan's height and something of his bone structure, but where Ethan's face was controlled, this man's was open in a way Maya instinctively didn't trust. "Daniel Voss," he said, offering his hand. "Ethan's cousin. I head the investment strategy division." She shook it. "Maya Caldwell. I know." He smiled. "I've heard your name mentioned more than once recently, which is unusual." She kept her expression neutral. "In what context?" Daniel tilted his head, a gesture that tried to look casual and landed somewhere between calculating and performative. "Ethan doesn't maintain personal interest in individual tenants," he said, "or in small PR firms. He has people for all of that. So, when he starts making direct calls and reviewing files himself," he paused, letting the implication sit. "I just thought you might want to know that whatever he's offering you, there's a reason he wants you close." Maya looked at him steadily. "That's a lot of assumption for someone who introduced himself 30 seconds ago." Daniel's smile widened. "I'm just being transparent. Something my cousin tends not to be." He held her gaze, a beat longer than necessary, then glanced back into the room. "Have a good evening." She watched him go, then turned back to the city lights over the lake, and stood there for a moment, her sparkling water warm in her hand. The next day, she went into the Voss Capital offices to drop off the signed lease termination paperwork in person, because she did not trust it to email. The receptionist asked her to wait, and while she waited, she looked around the lobby with the particular attention of someone who is already suspicious and knows it. On the credenza behind the reception desk, there was a framed photograph, the kind of corporate decor that was probably there before anyone thought to take it down. A group shot from what looked like a company event, 5 or 6 years old, based on the clothes. Most of the faces were turned toward the camera, but in the background, slightly out of focus, was another photograph, smaller, propped against the wall, as though someone had set it there temporarily and never moved it. Maya stood up slightly, tilting her head. The photograph showed an older man standing in front of a brick bungalow on a narrow street. She could not see the street sign. She could not make out the man's face with any certainty at this distance. But the bungalow's front porch, the wrought iron railing, the green painted steps was so familiar that for a second her chest did something that was not quite grief and not quite recognition, but was uncomfortably close to both. The receptionist returned and took her envelope. Maya thanked her and left. On the L home, she sat with her hands in her lap and thought about the photograph. She was probably wrong. Chicago had 1,000 brick bungalows with green painted steps. She had been looking for patterns because Daniel Voss had put the idea in her head, and that was exactly the kind of thing she did when she was unsettled, found patterns and coincidences and turned them into architecture. She was almost certainly wrong. But that night, she opened the cardboard box she kept on the shelf in her bedroom closet, the one that held the things she had taken from her father's house after the estate was closed, and looked at the handful of photographs inside for a long time, without finding the one she was half looking for. Her father had lived on South Marshfield in Pilsen until he died. He had not, to her knowledge, ever had any business dealings with a private equity firm. He had been a contractor who ran a small crew and made decent money until the recession thinned his client base. And then he had made less decent money. And then he had owed some of it to people who charged interest on what they were owed. She put the box away, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, telling herself she was building a story out of a stranger's expression and a blurry photo, which was not evidence of anything except that she needed to get more sleep. She almost believed herself. The offer came by email on a Tuesday, sent directly from Ethan Voss's assistant, which was unusual. Typically these things went through the business development contact at Brightfield, or through Maya's manager. This one came to Maya's professional address with the subject line, Contract Opportunity Voss, Capital Communications Campaign for Maya Caldwell directly. Her manager, Greg, forwarded it to her 2 minutes later with a single line. "This is above my pay grade. Call me." The scope of work was real, and it was not small. Voss Capital was undertaking a public rebranding campaign tied to a significant expansion of their community investment portfolio. New language, new positioning, earned media strategy, a long-form profile piece with a national outlet. The firm they'd been using had apparently been let go, and they needed someone who understood both the financial services space and the Chicago market. The budget was nearly triple what Brightfield normally worked with. The timeline was 12 weeks. The day-to-day contact would be Ethan Voss himself. Maya stared at the email for a long time. Then she called Greg. "You cannot turn this down," Greg said, before she had finished saying his name. "I know. This is career-defining work, Maya. This is the kind of contract that—" "I know, Greg. I just want to make sure you're hearing me." "I hear you," she said. "I'm taking the meeting." She took the meeting. It was in the 37th floor conference room at the Voss Capital offices, with Ethan and one of his operations directors, a brisk woman named Carla, who seemed to run at a different voltage than most people. Maya had prepared for 3 days competitive analysis, a preliminary strategic framework, 2 potential angles for the national media placement. She walked in and presented them, and she was good, and she knew she was good, and the meeting proceeded with the clean efficiency of 2 professionals who respected each other's competence and were not going to talk about anything else. Ethan asked incisive questions. He pushed back on her angle for the national profile piece, arguing that the community investment framing read as defensive rather than confident, and he was right, and she said so, and offered a revision. He looked at her when she said so, a look that lasted perhaps 1 second longer than necessary, as though the admission surprised him in some way he had not expected to feel. She signed the contract 3 days later. The first 2 weeks were almost entirely professional. Maya was in the Voss Capital offices 2 or 3 days a week, working with Carla's team on the brand language and coordinating with the media relations firm they were using for national placement. She saw Ethan in meetings, which were efficient and occasionally heated in the productive way that good working relationships sometimes are. He pushed. She pushed back. The work was better for it. She told herself this was all it was. But the city worked against her in small ways. Chicago in November had a way of making offices feel like the only warm rooms in the world, and late evening work sessions created a specific kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with intention and everything to do with bad weather and shared deadlines. On a Thursday night, in the 3rd week, they were the last 2 people in the conference room, going over the national pitch draft. Everyone else had gone home at 7. By 9:30, the draft was good, genuinely good, the kind of thing that would get opened, and Maya was gathering her materials and trying not to notice that the room had somehow become significantly smaller than it had been 3 hours earlier. "The Pilsen detail," Ethan said, without looking up from the document. Maya looked at him. "For the community investment narrative, I want to include the Pilsen corridor development. You know, the neighborhood." He said it as a statement. "I grew up there," she said carefully. "I know." The 2 words were ordinary. The way he said them was not ordinary. There was a weight in them that didn't belong to a sentence that short. A weight that suggested knowing was not quite the right word for what he was describing. "You keep doing that," she said. He looked up. "What?" "Knowing things." She held his gaze. "You knew my lease terms. You knew my name before I gave it. You knew I grew up in Pilsen. And now you're using Pilsen in the campaign pitch." She paused. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who didn't have an answer, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. "Because it's the right neighborhood for this story," he said. "And because you know it in a way that will make the writing real." It was not a lie. It was also not the whole truth, and she could see the difference, the small gap between what he'd said and what was underneath it, and she did not know yet how to reach through that gap without breaking something. "Okay," she said, and put the draft in her bag. She was pulling on her coat when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and something crossed his face, a tightening, brief and controlled, but she was close enough to see it. She looked at the screen without meaning to. The name on the notification was Caldwell Estate. She looked up. He had already picked up the phone and turned it face down, but he had seen her see it, and the air in the room changed in a way that was not dramatic and was somehow worse than dramatic, a quiet shift, like a room holding its breath. "Good night, Miss Caldwell," he said. She left. On the L home, she sat with her hands pressed together in her lap and thought about the name on his phone. Caldwell was her name, her father's name. Her father had been dead for 3 years, and his estate had been formally closed 18 months ago, which meant there was no active Caldwell estate that should be contacting anyone, unless something had been left open, unless there was a thread she didn't know about. She thought about what Daniel had said on the terrace. Whatever he's offering you, there's a reason he wants you close. She thought about the photograph she had almost recognized. She thought about the word estate and what it implied, and what it might mean that a man who bought buildings and made quiet decisions about other people's lives had that word saved in his phone under her name. 2 days later, she was back in the office for a strategy session when Daniel Voss appeared in the doorway of the conference room, unannounced. Ethan's face went very still, in a way she had not seen before. A stillness that was different from his usual composure, more effortful. "I'm interrupting," Daniel said, in a tone that made it clear he considered that his prerogative. "Ethan, the Harborside investors want to call tomorrow. Something about—" He paused, his eyes moving to Maya with deliberate casualness, a personal investment transaction from 3 years back. Apparently someone on the finance team flagged some documentation during the audit. A muscle moved in Ethan's jaw. "I'll handle it." "Of course." Daniel smiled at Maya. "Miss Caldwell, good to see you." He left. Maya kept her eyes on the document in front of her and said nothing, but she heard it personal investment transaction 3 years back, and she filed it in the place in her mind where she was keeping all the things that were starting to form a shape she wasn't ready to look at directly. She worked until 6, said goodnight to Carla, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby and stood in the descending silence and thought, 3 years ago, her father died. 3 years ago, his estate was handled by a small probate attorney who had told her there were debts, and that he had taken care of them, and that she should focus on moving forward. She had never asked who paid those debts. She had assumed the proceeds from selling her father's tools and truck, and the few things of value he'd owned had covered it. The attorney had said it was handled, and she had been 24 years old, and too exhausted by grief to pull at that thread. She pressed the lobby button again, though it was already lit, because sometimes your body needs to do something while your mind catches up. She could not sleep. That was not unusual. She had lived with insomnia in various forms since her father died, the kind that was not dramatic enough to call a disorder, and was persistent enough to be a constant minor inconvenience. But this was different. This was the specific sleeplessness of a person who is one decision away from knowing something they cannot unknow, and is not sure they are ready. She got up at 2 in the morning and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and a glass of water. And she did what she had been not doing for the past 2 weeks. She opened the Voss Capital internal document system she had been given access for the campaign work, restricted access, the kind you get as a contractor, and she searched for her name. She told herself she was looking for nothing. She told herself she would find nothing. She told herself that Daniel Voss was a man with an agenda, and that she was letting him put ideas in her head, which was exactly what he had intended. What she found was a folder marked Legacy Files Closed. It was not in the active campaign directory. It was in an archival section that her level of access was technically not supposed to reach, but the permission structure was old and had not been updated when she was onboarded, and when she clicked the folder, it opened. The folder contained a single email thread. It had been scanned and uploaded as a PDF. The originals were handwritten letters and printed emails, the kind you would keep if you intended to keep them permanently. The thread ran over 4 months. The first message was dated October, 3 years ago. It was from her father. She sat very still and read it. Her father had written to Ethan Voss directly. She did not know how he had gotten the contact information, and the email did not explain it. It began mid-thought, the way a letter begins when you have spent a long time thinking about what you are going to say before you write it. Her father had said that he was sick, and that he knew he did not have much time, and that he had a debt he was not going to be able to pay back before he died, held by a private lending company that would come after what little remained once the estate was settled. He said he had 1 daughter, and that she was going to have enough to carry without also carrying this. He said he had heard that Ethan Voss was the kind of man who sometimes quietly fixed things that were not his problem to fix, and that he was asking, not for himself, but for her. He had given her name. He had given her address. He had said she didn't know he was writing. and that he would prefer she never find out if it could be avoided, because she would not accept help if she knew it was coming, and because there was something in her that needed to believe she had gotten where she was on her own. He was right. He had known her exactly. Ethan's reply was 2 paragraphs. He said he would handle it. He did not say how, or ask for anything in return. He said he was sorry about her father's health. He said, "She sounds like someone worth knowing." The thread continued. Her father had written 3 more times, brief updates mostly, the kind a man writes when he knows he is running out of time to write things. In the last letter, sent 6 weeks before he died, he had said, "I don't expect you to look after her. She wouldn't let you even if you tried, but I'm grateful she'll get a clean start, and I hope someday she figures out it wasn't entirely her own doing." Maybe that's enough. Maya sat in her kitchen at 2:30 in the morning and stared at the screen until the words blurred. And then she closed the laptop and put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a while. She was not crying, exactly. She was doing something more complicated than crying, something that required stillness and silence, and the particular kind of dark that exists in an apartment at 2 in the morning, when the city is finally quiet. She was rearranging 3 years of her own story. Every time she had paid her rent and felt the quiet satisfaction of doing it herself. Every time she had mentally inventoried her self-sufficiency as an achievement. The clean start. Her father had promised her she had thought it was grief talking. The way dying people make promises to ease their own passing. He had made it happen. He had made it happen through a man she had been pushing away since the day she met him. She thought about the conference room and Ethan's voice. "You are looking at the wrong problem." She thought about him stopping when she said Pilsen. She thought about every moment of composure she had interpreted as arrogance, every careful non-answer she had read as evasion, and she understood now that they were the expressions of a man who had made a promise of silence to a dying person and was keeping it, even when keeping it cost him. She thought about Daniel's phone call, and the word audit, and the phrase personal investment transaction, and she understood what Daniel was building. He was going to take the transaction to the board. He was going to frame it as a misuse of company resources funds directed to a personal benefit, off-book, undocumented, in the formal sense. The fact that the personal benefit was a dead man's debt, forgiven as an act of grace with no gain to Ethan personally, would not survive the framing Daniel was constructing. The board meeting was Thursday. She had 3 days. She opened her laptop again. She read the entire thread a second time, slowly. The way you read something you intend to use. Her father's handwriting had been scanned clearly round, deliberate letters, the handwriting of a man who had not written much, but had always tried to write well. His signature on the last letter was less steady than the others. She saved the thread to her personal drive. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling and thought about Thursday, and what it would cost her, and whether the cost was something she was prepared to pay. She had kept her father's financial situation private for 3 years. Only her closest friends knew the shape of it, and even they did not know the specifics. She had rebuilt her professional reputation on competence and self-reliance, and standing up in a boardroom to explain that her dead father had asked a stranger to erase his debts was not a story she had ever imagined telling. But Ethan had kept a promise. He had kept it for 3 years, through every cold exchange, every moment when she had pushed him away. Every time she had been precisely as difficult as her father had predicted. He had never told her. He had never used it. He had just kept it, quietly, the way you keep something that was given to you in trust. She thought about Daniel Voss's smile on the terrace, and the specific pleasure in it, the pleasure of someone who has been waiting for leverage and finally found it. She made her decision sometime around 4 in the morning, in the way that real decisions are often made not with a clear sense of resolution, but with the quiet recognition that there was only one version of yourself you could live with. And she already knew which one she was. She set an alarm for 6:30, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Thursday arrived with the flat gray light of Chicago in late November, the kind of morning where the sky sits low and the city moves faster to compensate. Maya arrived at the Voss Capital offices at 8:15, 45 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. She had the email thread printed, and in a folder, she had her access badge, which was still valid. She had the fact of her father's handwriting, and the steadiness she had spent the night building in herself, and she was going to need all of it. Carla found her in the lobby and stopped short. "Maya, you're not on the schedule today." "I know," Maya said. "I need to be in that meeting." Carla looked at her for a long moment, then at the folder in her hand. Her expression shifted in a way that suggested she understood more about the internal politics of this firm than she was paid to discuss. "The meeting starts at 9, she said finally. "Boardroom is on 38. I can get you to the door, but what happens after that is on you." "That's all I need," Maya said. She stood outside the boardroom door at 8:58. She could hear voices through it, the low, overlapping conversation of people who were comfortable in that room and had been in it many times. She heard Daniel's voice, confident and unhurried, the voice of someone who had arrived early to set the table. She pushed the door open at 9 o'clock exactly. There were 11 people at the table. Ethan was at the far end, and when he saw her, his expression did the most controlled version of surprise she had ever seen. A human face produced a barely perceptible stillness, a fraction of a second before he reassembled his composure. She held his gaze just long enough to communicate one thing. "Let me do this." Then she looked at the board. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, in the voice she used when she was not apologizing at all. "My name is Maya Caldwell. I'm the communications lead on the Voss Capital rebranding campaign. I understand there's a question before this board regarding a personal financial transaction conducted approximately 3 years ago by Mr. Voss. I have documentation relevant to that question, and I'm asking for 5 minutes. The board chair, a silver-haired woman named Grace Holloway, whom Maya had researched extensively in the past 3 days, studied her. "Miss Caldwell, this is a closed board session. I'm aware of that. The documentation I have directly affects the characterization of the transaction being discussed, and it wasn't obtained through any improper means. It was accessible through my standard contractor access and was placed in the archive by Mr. Voss's own assistant." She paused. 5 minutes. The silence lasted several seconds. Ethan had not moved. Daniel, seated to Grace's right, had the expression of a man watching a controlled situation become uncontrolled, which gave Maya a deep, functional satisfaction she filed away to feel later. 5 minutes, Grace said. Maya opened the folder, distributed the printed copies she had made, and spoke. She said that her father had been Thomas Caldwell, a contractor in Pilsen who had died 3 years ago, with an outstanding debt to a private lending company. She said it directly, without softening it or framing it, because the only way to take the power out of a thing that embarrassed you was to be the first person to say it out loud. She said that her father had written to Ethan Voss while he was ill and had asked him to intervene, and that Ethan had done so. She told them to look at the handwriting on page 3, her father's signature, dated 6 weeks before he died, and she said, clearly, that this was not a covert personal enrichment transaction. It was a private act of charity to a man who asked for it, conducted with no financial benefit to Ethan Voss. She watched them reading. Grace Holloway read with the focused attention of a woman who had not gotten where she was by missing anything. 2 of the other board members were already talking quietly to each other. Daniel cleared his throat. The question before the board is whether company resources were. Mr. Voss used personal funds, Maya said. The transaction documents on pages 4 and 5 show the funds came from his personal account, not company capital. The audit flag was triggered because the transaction crossed the threshold for personal disclosure under the partnership agreement. That's a compliance reporting issue, not a misconduct issue. She looked at Daniel directly. Those are different things. Daniel's jaw tightened. The personal account was capitalized in part through Daniel. Grace's voice was quiet, and it stopped him completely. She was still looking at the documents. These are original handwritten letters. Can you explain to the board why your complaint to the audit committee did not include these? A silence of a different quality settled over the room. I wasn't aware of their existence, Daniel said. They are archived in the company document system under a folder accessible to the communications contractor conducting our current campaign, Grace said, without inflection, which suggests either that they were expected to remain unnoticed or that this presentation was expected to go unchallenged. She set her copy down. I'm going to call a brief recess. Miss Caldwell, thank you for your time. Maya gathered her folder and walked out of the boardroom, through the 38th floor corridor, and to the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby and stood with her back straight, holding herself together with the particular effort of someone who has spent a significant amount of adrenaline and is now doing inventory of what it cost. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. 3 floors down. She pressed the emergency stop. She stood in the stopped elevator for 4 minutes. She thought about her father, who had known her well enough to know she wouldn't accept help, and who had arranged it so she never had to. She thought about what it meant that the clean start she had been so proud of was a gift, and whether a gift you didn't know about was still a gift. And she decided that it was, because the intention was real, and the love was real, and the outcome was real, which was more than enough. She released the emergency stop and let the elevator take her to the lobby. She sat in the coffee shop across the street for 2 hours. She ordered a cappuccino and then a second one, and she sat with her laptop open and the documents still in her bag and tried to figure out how she felt, which was complicated in the way that things are complicated when they require you to be angry and grateful at the same time, and when the person you are angry at also kept a promise to your dead father for 3 years. At 12:30, Ethan walked in. He moved through the coffee shop with the same certainty he moved through every room, and he sat down across from her without asking, which under most circumstances would have irritated her, and now simply felt accurate. "Grace called a recess," she said. "I know." He set his phone face down on the table. "The audit committee has been asked to review Daniel's original complaint filing. There are inconsistencies. I noticed." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, 2 taxis were having a disagreement at the corner that involved a lot of horn. "He had access to those letters," Ethan said. "He knew they existed. He filed the complaint assuming you wouldn't find them, or wouldn't use them if you did. He was making a bet on my self-preservation instinct," Maya said. "The problem with that bet is that it assumed my pride was more important to me than doing the right thing." Ethan looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something that was unguarded in a way his face generally was not, as though the situation had required him to set something down. "Why did you do it?" he said. "You kept a promise to my father. That didn't obligate you to." "I know it didn't obligate me," she said. "I didn't do it because I was obligated. I did it because you kept a promise to a dying man who had very little left to give except the faith that you would keep it. And because Daniel was going to use a private act of decency as a weapon, and I've spent enough of my life watching decent things get used as weapons." She paused. "And because I was angry at you for knowing things about me you never told me, and I've spent 3 years treating you like a threat when you were the opposite of that. And this was the only concrete way I had to do something about it today." He was very still across from her. Outside, the taxis had resolved their disagreement, and the corner was quiet again. "I should have told you," he said. "Yes. Your father asked me not to. I know, and I understand why you honored that. I'm also allowed to be angry about it." She held his gaze. "Those aren't contradictory." "No," he said. "They're not." She turned her cappuccino cup in her hands. "You said, 'She sounds like someone worth knowing,' in your reply to his first email." A pause. "I did. Did you mean it? Or were you just being kind to someone who was dying?" He looked at her the way you look at a question that deserves better than a careful answer. "I meant it," he said. "And then you walked into that conference room and told me off about your lease before I had said 12 words to you. And I thought," he stopped. "What?" "That your father had significantly undersold the situation." Maya looked at him for a moment. And something that had been coiled in her chest since 2 in the morning, since much longer than that. If she was being precise, released in a way that was not dramatic or cinematic but was simply real. She breathed. The coffee shop was warm, and slightly too loud, and smelled of ground espresso, and the particular winter scent of people coming in from cold air. "I'm going to be difficult about this," she said. "Whatever this is. I'm not good at the part where you let someone in. I'm better at the part where I push them away first." "I know," he said. "You think that's going to be fine?" "I think I've been waiting 3 years, and I have not found it discouraging so far." She looked at him. He looked back, and in the particular quality of his attention, steady, without performance, the attention of someone who had made a decision a long time ago, and was simply waiting for the rest of the situation to catch up. She saw what patience actually looked like when it was real. "Don't make decisions for me," she said. "I'll try." "That's a low bar." "It's an honest bar." She nodded slowly. Outside, the November light was doing what November light in Chicago does in the late afternoon, going silver and then gold and then fading in a way that was sad in a good way, the way beauty is often sad. She gathered her things and stood up. "I need to get back to work," she said. "I still have a campaign to finish." He stood. He was close enough that she could see the slight crease at the corner of his eyes that wasn't there in the Tribune profile, which meant it was new, which meant the last few years had put it there, same as hers. "The Pilsen piece," he said. "For the campaign. The draft you wrote last week. What about it? It's the best thing in the document. Whatever you drew on to write it." He stopped, chose his words. "Don't change that part." She considered him for a moment. Then she put on her coat and picked up her bag and walked to the door. And she pushed it open and let in a rectangle of cold November air. And she said, without turning around, "You can buy the coffee next time. No deals. No decisions made on my behalf. Just coffee. Just coffee," he said. She stepped out into the city. 2 weeks later, the audit committee released its findings. Daniel Voss had submitted a complaint to the board that included selectively edited documentation. The transaction records had been provided without the contextual letters that explained their origin, which the committee determined constituted a material misrepresentation of the facts. The finding did not result in a criminal referral, but the partnership agreement had a specific provision for conduct that threatened the firm's reputation through bad faith internal action, and the committee invoked it. Daniel's role was restructured to a non-voting advisory position, stripped of the board access he had been leveraging for months. He did not fight it. The facts, once the full file was produced, did not leave him much room to fight. Ethan was cleared. The board issued a brief formal statement, confirming that no company resources had been misused and that the matter was closed. Grace Holloway sent Maya a handwritten note. It said, "Clarity is its own kind of courage. Thank you." Maya read it twice, then put it in the cardboard box in her closet, the one with her father's photographs, because it was the kind of thing that belonged there, with the things that were true and permanent and worth keeping. On a Saturday morning in December, 3 weeks after that, she locked her apartment door, the new one, on the 4th floor of a building on West Diversey that she had found herself and signed herself, with a lease in her name alone, and Ethan was standing in the hallway, in a winter coat, looking like a man who had taken the time to be there, and had no interest in pretending otherwise. "Coffee," he said. "Coffee," she agreed. They took the stairs.